Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Christian Thibaudeau. I was listening to an episode of Modern Wisdom, Chris Williamson, recently, and I think he was talking to Matthew McConaughey, and they just happen to have a random reference to strength training and resources from over the years, and randomly they just said your name, which I thought was pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
And you are a legend of the strength and conditioning space. That you've been the face of T Nation for, a couple of decades. I certainly read a lot of your stuff. It was influential on me. And we finally got to meet after a bunch of near misses. We both spoke at Swiss Montreal this spring. Welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here. Sorry for the lateness again. Crazy day. Lots of clients, launching a new supplement line. So lots of crazy projects, but glad to be here.
Alex LeMay sent me some of them as well. So far, awesome. All right, I'm going to dive right in.
Yeah, but
how quickly do we lose strength if we don't train it?
That's a good question because, and it really can't be answered in a very short answer because it does depend on, first of all, we need to understand that strength comes from various things. Okay, the nervous system efficiency, for example, muscle mass, obviously, the protective mechanisms that prevent you from using most of your strength, for example, the Golgi tendon organs, and even psychological mindset influences strength. So depending on what the main source of your strength is, it will be lost at different rates. For example, if you look at a lifter who is amazingly neurologically efficient, okay, but has a low level of muscle mass, then he might lose strength fairly rapidly, but regain it very rapidly also. If someone has built a lot of muscle, but is inefficient, neurologically speaking, he can still be strong. That will be more like bodybuilder strong, right? And that might be longer to lose because it requires losing a significant proportion of your muscle mass to start losing strength. And yes, the most current research does show that you can start to lose muscle within a week. But the reality is that you won't lose a significant amount of muscle until you reach the 2 to 3 weeks mark, enough to make a difference at least. And to influence your strength level, as far as losing muscle is concerned, I would say probably 30 days. You're losing muscle faster than that, but not enough to make a significant difference in strength. And if your strength comes mostly from protective mechanisms, for example, that's a totally different stories. So it really depends on what is your asset when it comes to strength. Are you more of a neurological lifter or more of a muscular lifter? So that influences the answer.
I love this because you went way ahead where I wanted to go. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase a little bit of that. Absolutely, the amount of muscle mass you have, you require that muscle to be able to recruit it to express force, strength, right? Power. And then how efficient you are is how strong the neural connection is to recruit that existing muscle. I also think about the early stages of strength development is also a lot of motor learning. It's skill development too. You become more efficient at that. So that's obviously related to your neural stuff. Can you go deeper on how the muscle side of things and especially the neural training to be more efficient at getting the most out of your existing muscle?
Yeah. First, let me explain in layman's term. I always use an analogy to explain the role of the various components of the nervous system and muscle. Because even saying the nervous system, it's inaccurate because it's the motor cortex, it's the central nervous system. It's also the peripheral system, the nerve, the synapses, the neuromuscular junction, all that stuff matters when it comes to how efficient the nervous system is. So let's use the following analogy of a factory. Okay, the size of the factory determines ultimately your production potential. Okay, if you have a bigger factory with more employees, in theory, you should be able to produce more, right? So the size of the factory is the muscle mass you have. So in theory, a bigger muscle is stronger, okay? But if you have a big factory and few workers show up to work, then, well, you cannot live up to your potential, right? So how many employees show up for work is motor unit recruitment. How much muscle fiber you can recruit when trying to produce force. So the more employees you can bring in, the more you can produce. Now, let's say that you do have a big factory. You do bring in a lot of workers every day. Well, if those workers are lazy, then you still don't live up to your potential. How lazy your workers are is called the firing rate, the speed at which the muscle fibers that are recruited produce tension or twitch, contract. The faster they twitch, the more force you produce, okay? So that's another important factor. Now, let's say that you have a big factory, your employees show up, they are not lazy. Well, what happens if the employees within a work environment, a workstation, they don't work well together? Okay, they're infighting, they are doing all their stuff one by their own side. They're not looking at what the others are doing. They're not coordinated. It still won't live up to the full potential of the factory, okay? That is intramuscular coordination. How well the motor units recruited in the muscle work together, okay? Now, what if the employees are not lazy? They are working well together within their workstation, but they are not working in a coordinated manner with the other workstations. Then once again, the final product is longer to build, so production goes down. That's intermuscular coordination. How the various muscles involved in a lift work well together, okay? And finally, what if you have an overprotective foreman? He's so deadly afraid of getting injured, of having employees getting injured, that he forces them to slow down to avoid dangerous situations. Well, that's the protective mechanisms that protect your muscle against yourself, which can be overly protective. Like someone who's never lifted before can use probably 20, 30% of its muscle strength potential. And just by getting your body used to training and not getting injured, you are convincing, quote unquote, your protective mechanisms to allow you to use a greater proportion of your strength. So these are all the neurological factors involved. And you can improve strength by working on each one of those. And if you want the fastest rate of strength gain, the goal is to target which one of those factors is limiting your force production and using a method to focus on that, to correct that situation.
A quick break from this episode to shout out RP Strength and the RP Hypertrophy app. I have a big confession. I've never used a coach before. I've always auto-regulated my training for decades. But I've known Dr. Mike Israetel and Nick Shaw, the founders of RP, for years, and I'll get behind anything they create, including years of reading their books, consuming their media, attending their seminars, and having them as guests on the show. And I've been using the RP Hypertrophy app now for several months. And several things have happened. It forced me to make smaller and more gradual but better increases in weight volume across time, like putting 5-pound plates on each side of a leg press. Like, who does that? Never before. Only 45s. It cut out the junk volume. It made my workouts faster and more efficient. I show up with a plan. I didn't have to think about what to do. I feel more accountable having to log my progress. And I don't skip things because I don't feel like it. If hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to manage your gains and to take the guesswork out of your program. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free, and if you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. I've also got you a $50 US dollar discount, so go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes. That's rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP. The average everyday lifter, where are the greatest areas of potential for them to train, and some recommendations on style of training if strength and performance is really important to them?
What I've seen had the best impact on, I would say, average Joes. Okay, those who are, they still want to get strong, they still want to improve, like your type A personality clients. Okay, its frequency is the secret. That's the fastest way to get stronger. The reason is that the more often you practice a lift, okay, and notice that I mentioned practice a lift. It's not the same as training it. Practicing it means that there's a quality to the performance. It's not just lifting from point A to point B. It's maximizing technical efficiency and also becoming used to handling fairly heavy weights, practicing heavy lifting. It also means that since you want every rep to be perfect or solid, then you're not pushing too close to failure, which can actually be detrimental for strength training. Proximity to failure is very important for hypertrophy, but it can actually be detrimental for strength gains because it reduces the amount of volume you can do, the amount of practice you can do on a lift, and the frequency you can train. So what I found to work best, and again, I have a client, the guy came to me and he had been training in the past, but like just typical machine bodybuilding stuff. And after like 2 months, for some reason, he fell in love with powerlifting. The guy had never squatted, deadlifted, or bench pressed before. So he started out very, very low. I mean, we started squatting like with a plate per side, 135, and it was pretty challenging. Deadlifting 2 plates aside, pretty challenging. Now he's deadlifting 5 plates aside, squatting 4, benching 3. And that's in 4 months. Obviously, the guy has potential, big structure, big dude, extremely competitive person. And he also gained like 30 pounds of body weight in that time frame. And he started to get the steroid comment. So he was super happy about that. Anyway, so, and what we did was essentially do the 3 power lifts plus military press 4 days a week, but using an effort level that allows him to recover. Now, the reason why frequency is the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to strength, especially for people who are at the lower level of training experience. First, because it improves technical efficiency. The more often you practice a lift, the more potential for improvement you have. But again, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So that's why the coaching part is very important, so that you're practicing the right things. Okay. Second, the more often you practice a lift, the better ingrained the motor pattern becomes, and the more efficient you become at recruiting the fibers and coordinating the fibers so that they work well together and the muscles work well together. Plus, the more you recruit the muscles involved in that lift, the more sensitive they become to being recruited. It's called synaptic facilitation. Essentially, the synapses, or the neuromuscular junction, where the nerve logs into the muscle and send a signal to excite the muscle fibers and produce force. That's the neuromuscular junction. And the more sensitive it is, the more easily it responds to the signal sent from the brain. So you can either get a stronger response to the same drive, or you don't need the same amount of neural drive to get the same result, which allows you to do more volume and recover faster because you're draining your nervous system less. So that's why frequency, to me, has the biggest bang for the buck, at least when you're starting out. Also, when you look at the average Joe, okay, the average person who's probably been training for maybe a year or 2, but on and off, not necessarily super hard, they don't have great workout tolerance. They don't have a lot of tolerance for physical work. So they cannot have a huge dose of stimulus at any given session. By spreading that volume over more sessions during the week, it allows them to maintain a high quality and also have a higher overall volume of practice without causing excessive fatigue.
And I would imagine, I mean, I've always thought of training for strength and muscle as reasonably concurrent for most your average people. And you're going to get a reasonably good hypertrophic stimulus just due to the volume of what you're describing. But where does the training style diverge, where you turn around and go, okay, we are going to absolutely bias this towards strength and not focus as much on muscle building?
Yeah. Well, first, it depends on the goal of the individual. Okay, that's always goal dependent. Some people want to be big and strong. Some people just want to be strong. Some people don't care if they're big as long as they're strong. And some people want to get stronger without being bigger, like a weight class athlete, for example. Okay, so that's the first thing to consider. But ultimately, you need to understand that, and when I say you, I mean your listeners, you need to understand that neurological gains are rapid. You can make significant neurological gains in 2 or 3 weeks, but they cannot go on forever. At one point, you need to build tissue to get stronger. I mean, there's only so far you can get by increasing technique, improving technique, and increasing neurological factors. And depending on your starting point, that might tap out at 3 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, sometimes 9 weeks. But eventually, focusing on the nervous system doesn't make much sense because you get those gains fairly rapidly. It's like, for example, I'm going to do a parallel with plyometrics. When you look at depth jumping, okay, research about depth jumping, you stand on a box that's like 1 meter high, you drop on the floor, and when you land, you jump as high as you can. That has been shown to rapidly increase your capacity to produce power. In fact, you have significant changes within the first 2 weeks of practicing depth jumps. But after 3 weeks, there's almost no more gains, okay? Because it's strictly neurological. There's very little structural changes. There's no hypertrophy. That's the difference with high-frequency barbell lifting, because as you mentioned, you still are getting some hypertrophy because of the sheer volume of work, okay? But at one point, if you really want to be as strong as possible, you will need to focus on building muscle. Now, the difference is between someone who just want to get strong, like a powerlifter, Olympic weightlifter, strongman, or just a dude who likes to lift big weights, and someone who wants to be more like bodybuilder looking, is which muscles you want to focus on. Like someone who's focusing on powerlifting, getting strong on the big basic lifts. And when I say powerlifting, it doesn't mean competition. We want to be strong on bench, squat, deadlift, maybe overhead press, and maybe, let's say, chin-ups or barbell rows. Okay. Then some muscles will be more important than others. So they will be emphasized over showy muscles like the biceps, like the calves, like whatever. Okay. So you don't train for hypertrophy the same way when your goal is strength. Okay, you still want to emphasize your weak points and train the muscles that will have the biggest bang for your buck. Because if you want to get strong, yes, at one point you need to include hypertrophy specific work. Okay, but you don't stop doing the strength work. So if you do a lot of strength work and you add hypertrophy on top of that, that's a lot of volume. That's a lot of stimulus. That's a lot of stress. So you cannot just pile on assistance work over assistance work over assistance work. I mean, I remember a lot of people when Westside started to become popular, because Westside is built on assistance work. You have like one heavy lift or one explosive lift per day, and the 80% of the volume is assistance work. But where people messed up and they okay, well, Westside doesn't work, it overtrained. Yeah, but that's because you're doing way too much shit. You're doing way too much assistance. You want your big biceps, but maybe investing 20 sets on biceps is not the smart move. You need to understand that the concept of training money applies. Let's say you have a certain amount of money to invest on the market, okay? Well, let's say you have $1,000. You can decide to invest $1,000 all in the same stocks or spread it over 5 or 6 different stocks. But the more different stocks you buy, the less money you invest in each. So the less potential gain on each you have. So it's the same thing when you are training for strength. Well, you want to invest the most money where the return is going to be the biggest. So yeah, it's the muscles involved in the lifts, but more specifically, it's the muscles that are holding you back. Because it's quite possible that, yeah, let's say you need lots of triceps to be strong on pressing. Sure. But if you're doing lots of bench press and your triceps dominant, for example, it's quite possible that you don't need extra triceps work because it's your dominant muscle in that lift. Maybe you need more shoulders and more pectoral work. Me, on the other hand, maybe I need more triceps, but I don't need more chest. So the capacity to diagnose, which is, and I'm going to go on a tangent here.
Sure.
Not sure if all your listeners know the concept of neuromuscular matching. You
probably not.
You probably do. Yeah. So neuromuscular matching basically is the theory that the nervous system will recruit the muscle fibers with the better internal leverage to do a lift, for example. So, for example, if you're doing and according to that theory, it means that there is a best lift for each muscle because the mechanics of each lift is fairly constant from one individual to the other. Okay. And it makes sense that the body would tend to use the muscle fibers or the muscles, the section of the muscle or the muscle that is the best suited, that has the best leverage to lift the weight. But it doesn't take into consideration other factors, like, as I mentioned earlier, the sensitivity of your neuromuscular junction. What if, for some reason, okay, your pectorals are hypersensitive to being recruited? Maybe when you were a kid, you always did most muscular in front of the mirror. And because of that, you became very, very efficient at contracting your chest. Or maybe you did a sport like you were a butterfly swimmer when you were a kid, using lots of lats and pecs. Those muscles, because you use them so much, you are more efficient at recruiting them because their junction is more sensitive than that of the triceps, for example. So in that case, even if a lift, according to the neuromuscular matching theory, is a better lift for the pectorals, in reality for you, it might be the triceps or the shoulders, depending on which muscle is more sensitive. So that's the first thing. Then there's also the matter of levers. Okay, we are not built the same way. I mean, you're tall, I'm short, you have long limbs, I have short limbs. So if you were squatting, chances are you're probably going to be building a lot more glutes than me, but I'm going to be building more quads than you. So again, and if you do something like a hack squat, it's probably going to be a better quad builder than a back squat. So again, depending on your levers, depending on your past training experience, like hockey players will build lower body at nothing because they're so good at recruiting the muscles once they start training. So it's really a matter of diagnosing which muscles will be holding you back, either according to your structure, past training experience, and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm going to give you an example that illustrates what I just said. A friend of mine, pretty good bodybuilding coach, okay, and decent bodybuilder himself, known for his arms, big arms, okay, but his right arm is literally 1 inch bigger than the left one. And obviously, being a good coach himself, for years, he tried to solve the issue by using only dumbbells, doing alternated curls, doing more work for the weak side, and so on and so forth, to no avail. And we were like brainstorming what could be the reason. I mean, there was no injury. Because he was a former football player, maybe like nerve damage, and that wasn't the case because all the muscles on that side were in balance. Turns out that when he was a kid, he was always in love with muscle, right? So as early as like 10 years old, every time he would walk into a mirror, he would flex his right bicep every single day, dozens of times. So by doing that, he built a tremendous capacity to recruit that muscle. And when he started lifting, that muscle responded a lot better because the neuromuscular junctions are more sensitive.
Lends credibility to Arnold's theories about doing a lot of posing, right? Arnold talked about that early in his career. I love the genetics part too. I'll go a little deeper. The anthropometry, different limb lengths, and a clear example is, someone with longer arms, bench press is going to be more challenging. Deadlift is actually going to be easier in a way, right? But I just like to point this out. There's even more subtle things that it goes a little bit beyond the scope of this, but where someone's tendons are attached may affect how powerfully they can recruit. We all know people who just are impossibly strong that are just around us. And I make some assumptions that there are just certain insertion points of muscles that may just simply create greater force production. I also suspect that a lot of that is explained by the neuromuscular recruitment. And I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on and explain, because you mentioned this earlier, maximum voluntary recruitment. Because we hear about, I love, the euphemism, we hear about grandmas lifting cars off of children in a moment of fight or flight. And perhaps you could explain why we cannot do that voluntarily.
Yeah. Well, again, it's protective mechanisms mostly. By the way, just before I get to that, speaking about the tendons, the Russians or the Soviet back then knew that very well. In fact, they did an experiment. They tried detaching the tendons from their wrestlers and attaching them lower on the bone to give them better levers. The problem is that in the brain, the motor pattern was still the same as before. So when they were eating, they were like, the fork was brought to their eyes and stuff like that, because they were still using the old motor patterns, but with different levers. Okay. But yeah, and there was a strongman in Quebec called Victor de la Mort. Victor, actually, he was 154 pounds on 5'7", and he bested Louis Sears. Best lift with one arm. He bent press with one arm, 278 pounds or 281 pounds with one arm overhead. And when they looked at his cadaver when he died, his tendons were literally twice as thick as normal tendons. So again, when you build with those tendons, the protective mechanisms will be a lot less protective, because they know you're not going to injure yourself because you have twice as much tendons as the average person. Okay. So that goes back to your question. So the protective mechanism are essentially sensors that are in your tendons. It's called Golgi tendon organs. And basically they measure how much force your muscles are producing. And there's a certain level that they consider safe. And as long as the amount of force you are asked to produce is in the safe zone, you're fine. But the moment you go above that range, then the brain will shut down force production to protect yourself against yourself. Now, what happens when you are in a do or die situation? Adrenaline happens, and adrenaline bypasses or shut down those protective mechanisms. You can actually literally tear your tendons apart if it's to save your life. When we've seen that. So that is a do or die situation. But the point is that those protective mechanisms are overly protective. As I mentioned earlier, a normal person can use probably 20-30% of their muscle strength potential. Some guy who's let's say, avid lifter, a serious lifter, can work up to probably 50%. An elite strength athlete might use 70%, maybe 80%. That's why you look at some Olympic weightlifters, they don't even look like they train. I mean, some are jacked, but most of them aren't. At least not to the point that it would explain holding 500 pounds overhead with arms the size of my forearms and no shoulders. So it's technical efficiency, but a lot of that is they've been lifting since they were 6, since they were 7, since they were 8, daily. And over time, their protective mechanisms became less and less and less protective, allowing them to use a greater proportion of their strength potential. That's one of the reasons why if you start younger strength training, normally your potential for getting super strong is much higher, because that's when you can program your body the best.
Probably explains farm strength as well.
That was the example that I had on my mind. Like when I was coaching lots of hockey players, we always had every year 1 or 2 guys that came from the farm, and they were like light year ahead of everybody else when it comes to lifting, especially on deadlifting and Olympic lifts.
This episode is brought to you by VersaGrips. After my first workout with VersaGrips, I swore I'll never lift without them again. VersaGrips is the premier lifting grip brand, and because my friend Nick Shaw, the co-founder of RP Strength, raves about them, I finally got a pair. I love them. If you're worried that using VersaGrips will interfere with developing grip strength, it won't, and it's silly to limit how much you can lift and how close you can train target muscles like hamstrings or lats to failure because your grip is the limiting factor. I often get asked by my female clients, and I've been recommending VersaGrips long before they became a sponsor. My clients love them. Regular straps suck. They're always too thick or too short. They're annoying to use. Personally, I've never found them effective. Maybe it's just me. VersaGrips are night and day better. They even form a protective layer between your delicate hands and the toughest barbell knurling, so they replace gloves too. VersaGrips are designed with premium non-slip materials, so you never have to worry about your grip slipping. You can just focus on lifting weight. I'll give you two options to grab your pair today. You can check out www.versagrips.com/Andrew Coates, which will automatically apply your discount, or visit the VersaGrips store on Amazon. Use the option that gets you the better deal, easier shipping, but shoot me a message to let me know you grabbed a pair. Let's talk about power and explosiveness, especially as people get older, because those qualities detrain, they diminish faster if you don't maintain them. How do those fit into the framework you've already laid out?
Well, first, okay, there is a connection. There's a link between explosiveness and strength, but not the one that most people think. A lot of people, and I've used that explanation myself in the past. I said that strength is the foundation to power. Okay, but it's not or we tend to say that, well, power is strength speed, so it's just strength displayed fast. That's a little bit limitative, okay, because the type of contraction or the recruitment pattern you're using during explosive actions and slow heavy actions are not the same. During an explosive action, you have a triphasic muscle activation. You have an initial burst of agonist activation. The prime movers get fired like crazy to produce that initial burst in explosiveness. And at the same time, the antagonists relax. Because if the antagonist, I want to curl as fast as possible, if my triceps is tensed, then I'm fighting my triceps, so I cannot go fast. So my brain knows that. So when I'm trying to go fast, it sacrifices stability, because activation of the antagonist, the opposing muscle, has a purpose when you're lifting. It's to stabilize the joint. So when you're trying to move fast, you sacrifice stability of the joint for more explosiveness. But what happens is, after that initial burst, then you have a relaxation of the agonists, the prime movers, and now the antagonists fire very briefly to create some stability once acceleration has been created. And from that stable position, you have a second burst in prime mover activation and a second relaxation of the antagonist. Of course, that happens in milliseconds, okay? But it happens. If you compare that to a heavy and slow movement, okay, it's monophasic. It's only one phase. You have an activation of the prime movers, and the antagonist, the opposing muscle, have a background co-contraction. Because when you're lifting heavy, stability is more important than acceleration. So the body prioritizes stability to avoid injury under heavy loads. So you can absolutely be very good at an explosive movement, but not good at slow and strong movement, and vice versa. Okay, where both are connected is in the role of, or the importance of, the central nervous system and the muscle fibers, the motor units you are recruiting. In both cases, you need the capacity to turn on, recruit the high threshold motor units as fast as possible and make them fire fast. So in that sense, strength training can transfer to some power gains. And on the other end of the spectrum, power work can translate to some strength gain. but only because it improves your capacity of the nervous system to recruit high threshold motor units and make them fire fast. But you still need to practice the heavy work if you want the speed work to translate.
So let's say for the average person, if someone wants to develop and express power, your exercise selection might be things that don't have a big stability demand. And is that true, or am I overcomplicated? Because I think of my favorite general population power exercises as literally hucking and slamming medicine balls against walls. Or, I mean, I'm not an Olympic lifting coach, but certainly it's not to say that Olympic lifting doesn't have any stability component, but your explosiveness is far more important. Trap bar jumps, and even just sprinting is context specific, but you might get someone sprinting with a sled because obviously that slows them down the maximal rate that they can, max speed they can travel.
And it depends what part of speed you want to improve. For example, sprinting with a sled or sprinting with a prowler, for example, will absolutely increase the start of your sprint, the first 20 meters. Because when you look at how you're sprinting with a sled, the body position is very similar to what happens during the start of a sprint. So you are more angled forward, your body is more parallel to the floor, and you are applying force for longer. So your feet are in contact with the floor for longer to create that initial acceleration. We could say that the sprint start is a lot more force dependent than explosiveness dependent. But once you get past that 20-meter mark on the sprint, you start to raise up. And at the, let's say, 30 to 40 meters mark, you're upright. And that allows you to have longer steps forward, so longer strides to reach your top speed, and your feet are not touching the floor as long. That would be improved more by plyometric drills, like hurdle jumps, or even just jump series, like jump where as soon as you land, you jump up, a knee tuck jump, stuff like that. But to answer your original question, personally, okay, when it comes to stability, and we can actually also mention stability in the context of hypertrophy, okay? Because the current trend is you want to make the exercise as stable as possible, because if a movement is unstable, you are sending the nervous system to more muscle to stabilize the body. So the muscle you want to target receive less neural drive. Basically, the concept is, let's say that your neural drive can send 100 units of activation. Obviously, it's a fake number. Well, if you're only sending that 100 unit to one muscle, that muscle receives 100 units of activation, makes it easier to recruit the high threshold motor units, the fast twitch fibers. Now, if you have 5 muscles involved in the lift, you're dividing that 100 over 5 muscles. So the target muscle you want to build does not receive as much. So it's harder to recruit the fast twitch fibers. That's the theory, okay? The reality is that stability is important only if it's a limiting factor. I'm seeing guys, I swear to God, they are literally like wrapping themselves on a machine. They are tying themselves up on a machine when doing a single arm dry step extension.
The seatbelt bullshit that we're saying with the science-based lifters. It's ridiculous. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's more stable that way. Yeah, but doesn't matter, because when you do a one arm tricep extension, stability is not a limiting factor. I mean, let's say that you strap yourself, you're going to use the same weight as if you're not strapping yourself, as long as you don't cheat. So I'm using the same approach when it comes to power training. Okay. Yes, I don't like exercises that challenge your balance when it comes to developing power. So I've seen, for example, I don't want to call them coaches, strength coaches, but they were working with young hockey players, and they're having them do like those single leg plyometric drills when they cannot even do a bodyweight squat, and they're like wobbly all around. I mean, that will not build power. Okay, maybe some advanced athlete might be able to do that, but to me, I want to select exercises that you can do while being in balance. But I'm not strapping my body when doing plyometrics. I mean, it's just, if stability or balance is a limiting factor, yes. But other than that, I don't worry about that.
You immediately made me think of, I rarely see it, but every once in a while, you'll see someone set up in a Bulgarian split squat, rear foot elevated, and they're doing it as a jump. But I mean, it's inherently unstable. So therefore, I think it has very limited potential as being a way to train power.
I've used it with some athletes who were extremely, extremely balanced, but only because when they did it, there was no loss of balance. But yeah, if you have someone do a Bulgarian split squat, just like another jump, just a regular, and they are now wobbly and moving around, the knee is out of position, and they lose their balance every 4 reps, then obviously you don't do that. And that would be like the end of the line when it comes to progress. I mean, literally, if we talk about single leg jumps, I can think of at least 15 steps before Bulgarian split squat jumps that you need to go through. When I'm approaching power training, first of all, my number one tool for power training is jumps and throws. Okay, because that's stuff that everybody can do. Olympic lift, I'm from Olympic weightlifting, so I love the Olympic lifts. But the reality is, it's not the best tool for most people. Because if you want to build power, you have other tools that do the job just as well. In loaded jump squats, for example, because you have the 2 main benefits of the Olympic lifts: explosive power with lower body and hips, and absorption when you land. So that's a 2 important component of the Olympic lifts. So you get that from the jumps. But with jump, it's fairly simple. Everybody knows how to jump. It's just a matter of starting at the right point. Let's say, for example, just for the vertical jump, I might have 10 to 15 steps to go from just landing from a low box all the way up to altitude drops, or all the way up to weighted depth jumps. That would be an extremely advanced method. And it's literally like a school system. The big problem I see with people starting power training is that they want to do the coolest exercises. They go on, and it's the same thing with hypertrophy, right? They see that cool exercise, I want to do that. And if I just post a vertical jump or a box jump on Instagram, how much traction will I get? None. It's like posting a squat. Nobody wants to see that. But if I show a single leg seated box jump squat with a weight, with a kettlebell, I want to do that shit. Okay, so that's what we see, and people think you need to do those to be athletic. Well, it's like asking a first grader to do a paper on the socioeconomic impact of Quebec leaving Canada, for example. That's the first thing I thought. But anyway, it's just way too advanced for them. I'm training a circus performer, and he is just getting back into training after like a year off because of injuries. And he obviously needs lots of power. But his training is extraordinarily basic. Box jumps. And the reason why I'm using box jumps, because that just decreases the falling height. So it reduces the stress of the jump. A box jump is easier than a vertical jump, because when you're jumping, let's say the box is 20 inches and you're jumping up, you may be landing from 5 or 10 inches. Whereas if you do a vertical jump, you are landing from 20 inches. Anyway, so we're doing that. We're doing skater jumps, and we're doing power snatch from the hang. Super simple. But every 3 weeks, we add complexities to the jumps. And to go through all the progression might take 6 months. Might take longer than that. Because if you work, for example, with an average Joe, I like to include explosive work with the average person. Why? As you mentioned, because it's a great anti-aging tool. It helps maintain fast twitch fiber. As you're getting older, you are losing fast twitch fibers. They are converting to slow twitch fibers, which will lead to loss in muscle mass, which will lead to loss in strength, loss in explosiveness, and even loss in stability. Because when you think about it, let's say you lose balance quickly. You're an elderly person, right? You lose balance quickly. Which muscles can fire fast enough, or which fibers can fire fast enough to prevent you from falling? Is the fast twitch fibers. So as you're losing those fast twitch fibers, you are at a greater risk of injuries as you're getting older. And the best way to prevent that is doing jumps, small amount, or throws, or anything explosive, really, because you can go with lower impact. I mean, you can go with prowler sprints. You can go with bike sprints, but move fast. And I like to do that, but very, 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 very gradually increase the difficulty of the movement. That's the thing with high power exercises. You can stick with the same basic movement for a very long time and still get benefits. And I like to use them at the beginning of the session because it actually amps up the nervous system. It will potentiate the rest of the session.
I like that. I really like, and I've mentioned a few times on these shows, power skips. You don't necessarily get very high for someone, so it's very accessible. You can express a lot of force without necessarily having a lot of impact. And it's pretty good. It's reasonably easy to learn. And I don't want to go too far into this because we're literally out of time, but I believe, in my interpretation of a lot of what you just said, is the more complex, the more skill learning, the greater the distance between getting to the actual development of the actual motor pattern, explosiveness, strength, power, you name it, because you're just spending so much time learning these skills. And I don't think those skills are necessarily transferable at that stage. So that theory is correct.
It is. I used to be, first of all, I also love those balance and hops. I mean, you know what we did when we were playing football, like the ladder drills and all that stuff that we use for warm-ups, like A skip, B skips, karaoke, stuff like that, high knees, heel to butt, stuff like that. Those, but done with intent, is one of the best things you can do for power because it's super low stress, but the intent is important. Anyway, just that last comment. Strength training, when it comes to transfer, it's general. Any form of strength training is general. So it's just a matter, the benefits you have, if there is any benefits you have on sporting performance, for example, it simply comes from first building an armor. So you're just more resilient physically. But more importantly, you're making your nervous system more efficient at recruiting the fast twitch fibers. And that can be transferred to sport once you practice your sport. But just because you're squatting bigger weights doesn't mean you're going to skate faster. I was talking to Ben Prentice about this, and Ben trains lots of NHL guys, and Ben is anal about testing. He tests everything all the time. He has tens of thousands of tests. And the only correlation he found with, for example, how fast someone is skating on the ice is how fast someone sprint for 10 meters or sprint with 10 meters with a sled. There's no correlation with those who are lifting the most on squat or trap bar deadlift. They're not skating the fastest.
A quick sponsor break for my current aspiring coach listeners. This episode is brought to you by Train Heroic. If you know me, you know I only work with sponsors I use personally and where I know the people behind the product. Train Heroic is the best online coaching software in the industry. Not only is it a great platform for one-on-one coaching, it's fantastic for group coaching and selling standalone programs. Train Heroic is used by some of my trusted friends, so I switched my online group program here, and my members love it, raving about its ease of use. Having a dedicated app means far greater reliability for my clients and has been by far my best experience with any online coaching software. Train Heroic is a proven and stable industry leader, meaning it isn't going to suddenly disappear. One of the biggest risks in choosing an online coaching software. When you start a free trial today, you'll get 90 days free to experience why I love and trust this platform. You'll get full support from their team, who've been a joy for me to work with. And I trust Train Heroic and the people behind it. Use my link, www.trainheroic.com/liftfree to start your 90-day free trial, or go to the link in the show notes.
I'll leave on this. When you earlier said about the speed of firing of muscles, I immediately thought of its transfer to sport because the start time of a baseball player reacting to a ball hit, or, swinging at a ball, or almost anything else in sport, that quick speed reaction time, what we see in hockey. And that is the difference. The pros are played at a faster level. People can follow you at christian.thibaudeau.army on Instagram. Where else do you want to send them? You got a lot of resources on your website.
Honestly, it's just Tib Army is the word. Like Tib Army is the website. It's the Instagram. It's the YouTube channel. So that's pretty much where it's at. Also, if you go at the EWS World, the supplement company, I also have a blog there. So I post articles weekly. So you can go there to see my newest material.
I know you guys sent me some of the protein powder, which is great, and then the pre-workout. And boy, the pre-workout's potent stuff. So,
and it's funny because I actually designed it not to be stimulating, but it really works well for some reason. I think it's the high dose of citrulline, but we have lots of product coming up because it's been held up by Canada Health. Some product have been submitted like 8 months ago, and we're still waiting for the NTN number. But we're going to have one pre-workout that's designed specifically for like hockey, basketball, football, IROX, CrossFit, because it targets all the energy systems. And we're going to have 2 different types of protein. Like the one that you tried, it has a higher dose of leucine to increase mTOR activation more. So that makes it a better like post-workout protein or as a meal replacement. We're going to have one for anti-aging protein or nightly protein, which is going to be half collagen and half whey. It's also going to have glycine because glycine helps with collagen production, and it also relaxes the nervous system. So at night, it actually helps you sleep better. So we're going to have a pretty complete line eventually.
Guys, keep your eyes on that, but make sure you're following Christian. Dive into his resources. I mean, you are, like I said, a legend of strength. Now, anybody listening understands just both the complexity, but also your ability to articulate it in an accessible way, which is the test of a great practitioner and educator.
For a guy who barely speaks English, it's pretty good.
I'm impressed. Always appreciate you, my friend. Thanks for coming on.